for the message tonight.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Good. So I'm going to be talking to you about something that is a chronic issue going on in this country right now, which is adverse childhood experiences. And I'm going to connect this with compassion and spirituality. Part of the presentation is going to be only about science, and the other part about spiritism and spirituality. Who here has ever heard about the adverse childhood experiences study? Nobody. Right. So we're going to talk about the study because this study pretty much clarified or brought into light, why people behave the way they behave when they become adults, why they develop diseases that they develop, mental illnesses and physical illnesses. And based on this study that was conducted in the mid-90s, it was like around 1995, by two physicians, one from the CDC and the other one from Kaiser Permanente in California. Together, they interviewed 17,500 adults with the average age of 57 years old about adverse childhood experiences. And we're like, okay, so what is adverse childhood experiences? So adverse childhood experiences is any exposure that you have, or anyone has, before 18 years of age that is traumatic, okay? And in this study, they wanted to see what about these exposures, what is about this, that when we become adults, we develop diseases, are disconnected or disconnected. So in this study, 74% of the people that answer all these questions about ACEs were white people, 70% were college educated, and then gender was kind of the same. I'm sorry because this slide is not as good, but males and females it has a 50-50, okay? And the age, like I said, it was average of 57 years old. And the exposure that they were asked about was abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. So physical abuse, emotional and sexual abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, household dysfunction is pretty much having a parent at home who has a mental illness, or a parent that was incarcerated, or a mother who was treated violently, so domestic violence, exposure to domestic violence, a parent with the issue with substance abuse, and divorce. So these 10 exposures were asked to these people and say, before 18 years of age, does it ever happen to your life? And what they found out is that 36% of the respondents had 0 ACEs, meaning had no exposure to all that stuff. 26% had 1 ACE, 16% 2 ACEs, 9.5% 3 ACEs, and 12.5% 4 ACEs. So what they figured out is that ACEs was more common than they thought. And again, those are white, college-educated people, right? And then they started connecting the scores. So for each exposure, you get a point. So they started connecting these scores with their health outcomes, because these people, again, they were the average age of 57 years old. So they started connecting how many points, or what is your ACE score, and what do you have right now? Do you have diabetes? Do you have cancer? Do you have a mental illness? Do you have an autoimmune disease? And what they found out was that people with 4 or more ACEs, and we're going to see in the next slide, were 2 times more likely to develop diabetes, 3 times more likely to develop cancer, and 10 times more likely to attempt to take their lives. So then they started to study and say, okay, so what happened to these people when they're exposed to these adversities? What happened to their brains that they end up developing all these chronic diseases and they die early? So part of the ACEs pyramid, that's where it's the base of their study, is that people exposed to adverse childhood, I'm going to try to use this stuff, people exposed to adverse childhood experiences have disrupted neurodevelopment. Remember, when kids are growing, Do you know until what age our brain is still developing? Who knows? 25. By 25 years old is when we finish developing our brain. So when a child is growing, in the first 3 years of life are the most important ones. If they are exposed to any of those things we talked about, any of those things, the likelihood that they're going to have a disrupted neurodevelopment is very high. And that's going to take them to have social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, consequently adopting high health risk behaviors, and then leading to disease, disability, and social problems, and early death. So because of that, they started like trying to connect all these dots, right? And those are some of the things. I'm so sorry about these slides, and it got worse than I thought, but they started connecting the ACEs score with behavior, lack of physical activity, smoking, alcoholism, drugs, missed work, severe obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD, and broken bones. So we already talked about that. So when you look, we already explained all that, but when you look, and I'm sorry again, I can't read, but I'm going to tell you. So this is the causes, this is from 2014, right? Causes of death by violence in the United States in 2014. The green one is suicide. So if you look here, this is the rank, first cause, second cause, third cause, and this is the total. So if you look here, you know, in the first, here, 10 to 14 years old, you see suicide is the second cause of violent death, and then third cause. And all this, and the red is homicide. So pretty much murders, right? So when you look at the leading cause of death, now you include other chronic diseases. And then you look, again the green, look at suicide. 10 to 34 years old, suicide is the main cause of death of young people in this country, and it still is, 2016. Then the blue is unintended injuries, which is like motor vehicle accidents, you know, construction workers that fall from the building, stuff like that. And then again, the red is homicide. And then here on the total is heart disease, cancer, chronic respiratory disease. And then when you mix everything up, suicide, you know, comes here. But really, what I'm worried about, this is what I'm worried about, right? Young people are killing themselves. Come on. So they look at this, and then they look at ACEs, and you're like, what are we missing? What are we missing? So before we understand what ACEs does to our bodies and our brains, I want you to understand how our brain works. So our brain, so this is what we call the triune brain model. So triune is 3 in 1. So we have 3 brains in 1, and this has to do with our evolution. So the reptiles, like the crocodile, for instance, they have the reptile brain. The reptile brain is connected to instinct, dominance, survival, is our most primitive brain, according to evolution. The mammal brain, which is monkeys, dolphins, and all that, it has to do with feelings, emotions, and fear. It's in this area right here. And then the human brain, that's the part that we have that is different than the other mammals, than the reptiles and the other animals, is the area connected to reasoning, to cognitive function, to language, ideas, concepts. Vision is behind here. So I want you to look at this, and I really want you to memorize all this, because we're going to talk about this the whole presentation, including when we talk about Spiritism. Because surprisingly, the spirits bring this up in the Spiritist book. So how ACEs interfere with health? So you guys know about stress, right? Is the stress good or bad? Who thinks it's good? It's good?
Yeah.
It can be good. Is stress bad? It can be good. So it's both, right? So when the stress is good, what happens when we are stressed out? Our pupils open. We're more active. We can think better. We release what we call stress hormones. That includes steroids, cortisol. We're going to talk about that. Cortisol increases glucose. The glucose goes to the brain, makes us think faster. It goes to our muscles. It's great. When we're going to take an exam, when we come to the Kardec Spiritist group of Austin to do a presentation. Right? But then, sometimes, there are times in our lives that it becomes tolerable. What is a tolerable stress? Tolerable stress is like this. You go to work and you dread to go to work every day because you hate your work, because you get stressed out at your work, and because, it's just not fun to be around the people at work. But when you get home, what do you have? You have your wonderful family, you have your kids, you have your spouse, you have your mom. Those are your buffers. That's what we call them. So we can go through life having stress, but if we have our buffers, which are our supportive relationships. Now, imagine if you go to work every day and you hate work, and you dread to go to work. And then you go back home at night, and it's not a supportive home. You have a parent that comes in drunk, and then he hits your mom. Or you have a mom that comes in and stressed out from work. She gets upset at you because you didn't clean the dishes, and then she hits you. So several things can make our lives and make stress very toxic to us. But children and adolescents are especially sensitive. Why? Because their brain is developing. Their brain is still developing. And what happens with stress, toxic stress, not stress, toxic stress, is that this release of hormones that we're going to be talking about, you start releasing those hormones over and over and over again. So your brain, every time it perceives a stimulus that is a threat to you, okay, you start activating all these areas in your brain here in the hypothalamus, and then you produce CRH, which is a hormone that's going to stimulate your pituitary to produce ACTH, which is another hormone. That's going to go to your adrenal glands. Your adrenal glands sit on top of your kidneys, right here. And then your adrenal glands are going to be releasing cortisol and epinephrine, which is adrenaline and noradrenaline. So when this happens, that's when we feel all that stuff. Our hearts start beating fast. You start sweating. Our pupils open. You're ready. You're ready to do what? To fight or flight or freeze. So when we are in a situation of threat and toxic stress, our body is in constant alert. Our brain is always like, it's like an ambulance all the time in your head. And then, unfortunately, for kids, they're developing their brains. These hormones, at the same time that they help us when it's in a balanced way, when it's in a healthy way, they can also cause damage. And the way they cause damage, and here, those are the changes in the brain architecture, as you can see. Those are neurons. Neurons, they connect with each other, right? With toxic stress, there is a rupture of this connection, as you can see here. Now, if you remember from this other, again, I love this brain. If you remember, if we start having ruptures or not developing our prefrontal cortex that help us with what? Reasoning, cognitive functioning, judgment, well, we're going to have problems. We're going to have problems. And that's what happened with these children. The other thing that toxic stress does is mess up with your DNA. And I remember Dr. Fortes right here talked about this when he talked about cancer. And it has to do with something called epigenetics. Now, if you want to impress someone and you're talking about something, you blame on epigenetics. You can do that and everybody's like, but really, this is true, okay? And researchers have been studying epigenetics over and over again, because they are finding out that all this stimulus coming from the environment, they really get under skin and they change your genes. I'm going to give you an example just for you guys to understand. Have you ever heard about bipolar disorder? Okay. So bipolar disorder, type 1, for kids that have one parent with bipolar disorder, they have 25% of chance of developing bipolar disorder. For kids that have two parents with bipolar disorder, they have 50 to 25% of chances of developing bipolar disorder. Now, if you think about it, you're like, well, you have one parent, 25% chance, so 75% chance of not developing, right? So why do they develop? Because the gene gets activated when they are exposed to adversity. They develop it. The same thing, if you have two parents, they're bipolar, you have 50 to 75%, but you have 25% or 50% of not developing. But if you are exposed to adversity, depending on the environment you're in, even your parents can activate your gene, right? Depending on if they're treating themselves or not. So that's how it works. And then, yeah, I put this in here, but again, this slide is not as good. But pretty much to say, you know, epigenetics involves genetic control by factors other than individuals, DNA sequencing. Epigenetic changes can switch genes on and off and determine which proteins are transcribed. Okay? So that's pretty much what happens. We can talk about the methylation later if you want, but I'd rather focus on something else because I have a lot of stuff to talk about. Anyways, ooh. So now we're going to talk about the effects of trauma in the developing brain. Again, like I said, the first years of life are the most important years, right? Not that you cannot get traumatized when you're 9, 10 years old, but the first 3 years are the most important. And the reason is cognitive development, attachment, and trauma triggers are going to develop at that point. And why? So cognitive development. So part of the way we interact with the world is through what? Language, right? If we can talk, if we can interact, if we cannot express ourselves, we cannot give and receive, right? If you think about it. So for children that have such severe trauma sometimes, they were exposed to many adversities since they were little, they have difficulty talking. They have difficulty with language. So they cannot express themselves. What do they do when they cannot express themselves? They kick, they hit, they throw themselves on the ground because they cannot talk. They cannot figure out to say what they're feeling, right? Attachment. So secure attachment is one of the main and most important things related to how kids are going to develop relationships later in life. So if a child has a parent or a primary caretaker, it doesn't have to be a parent because, you know, we adopt children, right? So you have a different person. The grandmother takes care of the children, the aunt or the uncle takes care of the children. The important thing is the primary caretaker, that person that is there every day for the child. If that person, the person who teaches trust and how the child is going to interact with the world, is the same person that causes the traumatic event, then we have a problem. Because that brain is going to get confused. So in this case that I put in here, it's more related to neglect. And again, research has been shown now that neglect is actually worse than physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. So this is a brain of 2 to 3-year-old children And then here, it's the normal brain. You see how like it's pretty and nice and has a lot of like the cortex and all the matter here. And then you look at these two, it's the same kid, right? So you're looking at the brain from here. So imagine if you're looking from here. And then if you look here at these spaces, we call sulci. Do you see the difference? Yeah. So this is underdeveloped brain. And this is tragic because there's no fix for this. That's why people think nowadays that neglect is much worse than sexual, emotional, and physical abuse. Because this, you can recover this. And this actually, if you get a CT scan or an MRI of a 70, 80, 90-year-old person, that's what you're going to see. Where the brain starts to atrophy. It's pretty much like this. And then the third is trauma triggers. What happens with these kids after they get traumatized, and trauma, it's so ingrained in them, is that anything that reminds them of the event triggers them and they flip out. That happens with children, that happens with teenagers, and it happens with adults. So it can be a smell, it can be a word that you say, it can be something that they watch on TV, it can be any interaction that reminds them of the traumatic event. So we have, when we see people flipping out, freaking out for no reason or for little reason, I can guarantee you something is going on in that brain. Okay? I'm going to give an example. I have a friend of mine, one of my best friends in Brazil, who's married with my best friend in Brazil. They're both neurologists, and they were not able to have children. So they just adopt two kids, a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old brothers. And one day she calls me freaking out because the kids start freaking out. Their trauma start coming out. They were in foster care all this time pretty much, since they were little. So God only knows what they went through. And she calls me up and she says, look, he threatened me with a knife. And I'm like, well, no, and then we go on and try to explain everything. Now, thank God, because she is a neurologist and she read a lot about before adopting a child, she was already having someone helping her. But everything she described, it was expected, and I told her that. And I said, yeah, they are not having any abnormal behavior for the type of exposures they went through in their lives. Okay, so understanding ACEs. So the reason I wanted to bring this to you is because we have to change the way we think about people, the way we think about mental illness, the way we think about people's behavior, because we have to change the narrative. Our narrative is like, what's wrong with you? You have a good life. What's wrong with you? And we have to switch. We have to switch to what happened to you. You know, people are not born sick, right? They become sick through life. They do become sick. So I put this here, and again, you cannot read. Yeah, I'm going to read to you. So the what's wrong with you person going to look at an ADHD kid, and it's going to say something like this. ADHD is just a made-up disease to give kids an excuse for not paying attention. So really, people don't believe that this is real. And then for PTSD people, what did they say? What happened to you wasn't even that bad. I mean, come on, there's a war in Syria right now. And you think you have PTSD? So we are very, how do you say, not as much sympathetic to people sometimes. And we have to start changing that. Because if you want to create a better world and have a better world, we have to be more empathetic and understanding of people's feelings. Bipolar disorder. Why can't you control yourself and try and act like a normal person? Because they can't. The brain is not working normally. Okay? Why do you smoke so much? Because I have to calm myself down. Why do you drink so much? Because I'm in so much pain. Why do I have to use drugs? Because I have to numb myself all the time, because it's too much pain for me to bear. And we have a hard time understanding that. Why? Because we go through pain in our lives too, and we don't become addicted. We don't smoke. But guess what? Trauma and adversities, they are different for everybody. So if you want to, criticize someone for their behavior, you have to put their shoes on, go back to the womb of their moms, live their life, and then you can talk about it. Okay? So this is the message, part of the message I want to send to you. Depression. Get over it. Lots of people have it worse. Come on. Kids in Africa dying. But guess what? That person is suffering at that moment. And this is what I'm going to say. Not good, right? Not good. So we have to change our mentality and look at people thinking, what happened to them? What happened throughout their lives that culminate with that disease, with that mental illness, whatever that is. We have to have a more compassionate way of looking at people. Now you're going to ask me, why this is very depressing. I don't want to hear about it. You're not giving me any solutions. But we have solutions. ACEs are not a life sentence. Now, we have to think that, like depression, you have depression, minor depression, moderate depression, severe depression, major depression. For trauma and for those exposures, it's the same. Again, that's why we do the score. It's not perfect, but that's why we use the score. So what happened to you? Environment works with genes. You can't go to places with your mind if you can't go to places, to good places with your body. And again, I'm going to use an example. So I'm from Rio de Janeiro. Rio de Janeiro is a very violent city. We have lots of slums there, favelas, and we have a lot of violence. And those kids that live there, they sleep listening to gunshots. They wake up, go to school, and see bodies in the street. Is this a childhood trauma? Yes. It's not abuse, it's not neglect. But can you imagine living in an environment like that? Not fun. Not fun. And we think they have to behave like we behave. They're not going to. They're not going to. Anyways, so some solution. So people nowadays are starting to look at meditation and mindfulness to help traumatized people. Meditation and mindfulness, again, is going to act on those parts of the brain that I talked to you about. Mindfulness is a way of creating awareness about your feelings. So mindfulness is pretty much like, I got here at Kardec Spiritist group of Boston, and immediately my heart started pounding. And I'm like, okay, I'm just stressed out and nervous because I have to give this presentation. But I'm aware that I'm feeling that. I'm going to sit down there, I'm going to calm myself down, and I'm going to move on. Right? Well, but this is easy, right? This is regular stress. Now for traumatized people, they really feel very real things in their bodies. They feel pain, they feel despair, they have fear, they have anger. And they have to be aware and listen to their bodies. Feel their bodies. That's awareness, that's mindfulness. And then use coping mechanisms to make that go away. Now, how can you going to teach this to a child? Look, you're going to sit down here, and you're going to think about this. And you can't do that, right? But thank goodness, we have a lot of trauma therapists that do other things and help these kids. Meditation. Meditation is wonderful. We have our meditation night here on Mondays, 2nd and 4th, right?
2nd and 4th.
2nd and 4th of the month.
No, 1st and 3rd.
1st and 3rd of the month.
Sorry.
So meditation, what meditation does is pretty much, meditation pretty much does that. Let me find my brain there. So what meditation does is that You know, meditation we do when we are like stressed out and all that and having all those feelings and we have to calm ourselves down. So meditation pretty much gets all the vibrations in these areas and elevate to this area of reasoning, and then we calm this area down and we start using this part of the brain, actually this one, much better. Now, this is our earthly things, right? So, but how can we help spiritually speaking? Through compassion. Again, these kids that are traumatized, these teenagers that are traumatized, they have very abnormal behaviors. Very abnormal behaviors. And again, through compassion, we can help them and we can help ourselves. Self-compassion is something that we should do every time, every day. So compassion. Let's see what he's saying. Oops. Put on them as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another. This is what I like the most. I like this. But bearing with one another. Why bearing with one another? We have to bear with each other. I mean, we already know, we as Spiritists, we that believe in God, we that believe that everybody's connected. We are all connected. Even if we don't know each other. Even if the person in China, I don't know the person in China. But guess what? We already know that every suffering in this planet echoes. Echoes. So if we have someone, so we're going to start small, in our community that is suffering, we're going to feel it. We may not be aware of it, but we're going to feel it. Spiritually, we're going to feel it. Right? So we have to have that in mind when we see people doing things like the UT student that was murdered. So the boy, do you guys remember that? Mm-hmm. The boy that murdered that girl, who was 17, he is 17 years old, he's still alive. But we can talk about his life until he turned 17 and commit that murder. Because one of the things that we don't do, because we always feel very sorry for the victim, and we feel very sorry for the families, which is the most normal thing to do. But what I'm interested in, sometimes, actually all the time, is why things happen the way they happen. And in his case, for instance, he had a horrible life. Horrible. It was abuse after abuse after abuse. You know how many CPS cases, CPS, Child Protective Services, how many cases were open? 10. Throughout his life, 10 cases were open. He went and had contact with 26 foster families in 17 years. 26 foster. How can you build relationship, empathy, respect, when you go through all your life without it? They don't know what it is, right? So I wanted to give the I think examples helped us understand what we're talking about. So then I decided to put some definition, compassion definition. So the first one is more like a spiritualist definition. Compassion is made up of two words, co meaning together and passion meaning a strong feeling. So a strong feeling together. The second one is from the dictionary Merriam-Webster. A sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. And again, compassion is not pity. Pity is like, oh my God, her daughter died. Oh, I'm so sorry. Let's go eat pizza. That's pity. Compassion is something that you feel with the person. But on top of that, you also want to do something to alleviate that suffering. That's compassion. Okay? So I really love Dr. Brené Brown. She has, do you guys know Brené Brown? Nobody knows. You guys have to watch her videos. You do?
Yeah.
They are wonderful. So one of her videos, and she does a lot of research about empathy, compassion, vulnerability, shame. And then in one of her research, she did a research with compassion. And then she found that compassion is a deeply held belief that we are inextricably connected to each other by something rooted in love and goodness, which is God. Again, it's a deeply held belief that we are inextricably connected to each other by something rooted in love and goodness. Am I connected to the person who murdered that girl at UT? Yes, I am. I mean, I actually live in his community right now. You know? So we have to start thinking about these things. Then we're going to talk about the Spiritist book. And again, I'm going to bring the brain back, because I want to look why people do these horrible things, these cruelties, right? And then I found these questions. So the first one says, why was brutality a dominant characteristic of primitive people? Remember the primitive brain, the reptile brain? I'm going to give another example. Do you guys remember? And I know I'm just giving tragic examples, but it's, you know, I have to illustrate it. Do you remember the boy that died at Disneyland, that the crocodile came and took him? If you read the story, you're going to see that they found the body intact. So what did the crocodile do? It was a primitive instinct of self-protection. The boy was probably playing in the water. The crocodile was close to him, and he felt threatened, and he attacked the boy. He didn't eat the boy. That's our reptile brain, and we still have that. So as humans, if our brain, remember our frontal lobe, and these kids, they are not developing it. It's all messed up. What type of brain, or of those brains, are going to prevail? The reptile and the mammal brain. Unfortunately. But it happens. So look at the answer he gives. These people, these people were still controlled by the brutishness of matter. They surrendered totally to their animal nature and single-mindedly focused on self-preservation. This is what generally made them cruel. Furthermore, they were under the influence of equally primitive spirits because of what? We already know, we are being spiritists, I don't know many of you, but I've been a spiritist for at least 20 years. We already know that we connect and we attract the way we are vibrating, right? So they're saying that. Over time, there's a hope. And through interaction with more evolved cultures, these characteristics recede. Again, if they are placed in a good environment that they can thrive, they get better. Doesn't cruelty result from lack of moral sense? And look at the response. You should say that the moral sense is underdeveloped. Again, where, as humans incarnated, where is our moral sense? In our frontal lobe. That's our reasoning, right? So you should say that the moral sense is underdeveloped. Not that it is absent. It is latent in all people, and it will eventually transform them into good and compassionate beings. Let's hope. I mean, these people are going to get better at some point. It exists in the most primitive individual, just as the principle of a scent exists in a flower that has not yet bloomed. And then those are the comments about those two questions. Human beings possess the entire range of intellectual and moral faculties, though often in a rudimentary or latent state. Whenever circumstances are relatively favorable, these will develop. When one faculty becomes dominant, development of another may lag behind. Again, if we develop part of our brains that are not as good, the development of others may lag behind, and vice versa. The more we evolve, and the more, okay. What did I do? I did that what you told me not to do.
Maybe we'll go back. Go back to the, just try it.
So, I want to keep going because of the time. So again.
Just go on the laptop.
We're almost done. It's like 3 more slides. There you go. Sorry. Excessive stimulation of the physical nature may, so to speak, stifle the development of moral sense. What was the excessive stimulation we talked about at the beginning of the presentation? The stimulation of our fight and flight defenses. Do you remember I told you guys? I said, toxic stress, you keep doing it over and over and over and over again until you start messing up everything in your brain and everything in your body. So excessive stimulation of the physical nature may, so to speak, stifle the development of moral sense. By the same token, the growth of moral assets tends to weaken the influence of carnal appetites. And then, from the law of justice, love, and compassion. Again, we're going to talk about compassion. What did Jesus really mean when he used the word love? Compassion from everyone. Well, do I have to have compassion for the murder? Yes. Do I have compassion for Donald Trump? Yes. We have to. I mean, this is what we're supposed to do as Christians, right? Tolerance for the imperfections of others and forgiveness of offense. I'm not saying this is easy, but we have to be aware and start working on it, okay? Again, from the Spiritist book in the Law of Justice and Compassion, love and compassion are the complements of the law of justice. To love our neighbor is to do to him or her all the good in our power, all that we wish might be done for ourselves. So again, if we were in that situation and had a horrible dysfunctional household, went through all these horrible stuffs in our lives, how do we want to be treated? With more abuse? With indifference? With condescendence? That's not what we want, right? According to Jesus, compassion is not restricted to giving money to the needy. It relates to all relationships regardless of the rank and social position involved. By fostering tolerance, compassion recognizes that all of us, without exception, are in need of tolerance. Come on, sometimes we are difficult too, right? And then again, this is kind of the in a nutshell from that. Compassion teaches us not to look down on those who have less than we do. All too often. And those who have less than we do are we're not only talking about material things, right? We're talking about a lot of things. There's people that have a pretty difficult life, right? So all too often, we are quick to lavish deference on the rich while making no effort to be at least courteous to the needy. And the needy, again, the needy is not only the poor, it's any person that is suffering. Such social ineptitude only adds humiliation to lives that already carry considerable hardship. The truly charitable person makes a genuine effort to treat as equals even those who worldly conventions place at the lowest end of the scale. There's a lot of stigma still around mental illness, around people that have HIV, for instance, around people that have, some diseases. There's still a lot of stigma around it. And again, why? Why do we think we are better than someone that has HIV? Why do we think that we are better than someone that has a mental illness? We just had a little bit better this life, right? Compassion according to the gospel. We're almost done. Compassion is a quality that brings you the company of angels. It is the sister to charity. And together they lead you to God. In the face of the pain and suffering of your fellow human beings, let compassion move your heart. Compassion with heartfelt pours from love. The kind of love which pours from selfless dedication. Again, compassion is not only feeling with the person, it's doing something to alleviate their pain. This concern for the less fortunate is a virtue, one which Jesus gave witness and which he made the cornerstone of his sublime doctrine. Jesus was the main example we had. Jesus would sit down with the poor, with the prostitutes, with the robbers, everybody. And if he was alive today, I can guarantee you that he would be in the jail, talking to the prisoners. He would be with the needy people, the poor people. He would be with the human trafficking people. He would be with the prostitutes. He would be doing the same thing. So why don't we do it? Because we still have a hard time. We're still learning. And that's okay. But we have to have that in mind. Because these people are going to cross our lives. And we have to have that in mind so we can do something different. And again, environment is very important. And again, that's why I say, don't judge someone, because you don't know the environment that person was in. When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. Got it? All good?
Yeah.
That's it.
Thank you.
All right.